All right, welcome back, everyone. We've now completed modules 1, 2, and 3, and now we're moving on to module 4. And in module 4, we're really going to go ahead and hone on more of some of the security concepts, okay? So in this one right here, we're going to be talking about chapter 8. And in chapter 8, we're going to be focusing on really how do we go ahead and take Linux and look at it at a security level. So in this one, we talk about how to create account security policy. So one of the main things you have to understand is that in cybersecurity, not only will you be doing things such as maybe pen testing and stuff like that, but you also may be consulting for a company. And when you consult for these companies, you have to go ahead and also look at their policies, because the policies also are the second part of a three-part structure. There is the actual infrastructure and the integrity of the network, right? Then there's also the people that actually interact with this network. That's another piece you need to go ahead and investigate. And then lastly is going to be the policies that are in place for these companies. So when you look at a policy, you have to go ahead and make sure that it's actually make sure first of all they have policies in place. Make sure they're not outdated. Make sure they are live and they're very, very helpful in understanding what they're doing. So you got to make sure you look at that. So we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit in this section, and then we'll go ahead and go into the next module. And the next module, we get into a lot of fun. We actually start moving we're moving away from CentOS and we're moving into Kali Linux. And that's where things start to get a little bit interesting. All right, so in this one right here, we're going to talk about how we can go ahead and use Kali to do security probes. And then we're going to talk about how we can create a policy for user accounts. So I want to touch base on what Kali really is. So Kali is a flavor of Linux, or distribution or distro. Now, it's not just any type of flavor of Linux. It's specifically a security-based distro or security-based flavor. And one of the cool things about this is that this actually does contain a huge amount of tools that are used by not only just pen testers, but also hackers to go ahead and get into people's systems. Now, this isn't your only option though. There are other couple options. Some of the other ones you can go ahead and look at. I'm going to give you a list of them right here. So you want to check them out. You're more than welcome to, and they'll go ahead and be able to get stuff for you. So the first one I'm going to talk that you can check out is one that's offered in the Hack the Box Academy. And let me bring this out just a little bit. So we're looking at, and so this is called ParrotOS, okay? This one's offered in the Hack the Box Academy. To sign up for Hack the Box Academy, it's totally free. It's another way you can go ahead and start learning some of these skills and tools on your own. It has some really great exercises. There is also a paid version too, if you'd like to do that one as well. But Hack the Box is a really cool, nifty, test your skills kind of activity. There's also another one called On the Wire, which is really, really good. And I'll go into those maybe a little bit later in some bonus activities. Another one you can look at is someone called Tails. And there's also Cubes OS. Another really good one that a lot of people will use is BlackArch Linux. Now, BlackArch is referring to like a black hat, attacker. Now, this actually isn't really the Linux distro. It's actually Arch Linux. And if you have anything, any of y'all have purchased the new Steam Deck, this is actually what the Steam Deck is using, which is the SteamOS, which is based off of a flavor or a distribution of Arch Linux, okay? So the next one also is gonna be ClearOS. ClearOS, and then another one that you can look into is something called Alpine Linux. So these are your security distros that, in my opinion, are some of the ones that offer, that are really good in regards to being able to give you some that kind of actual background, practice, and stuff like that. So, and these all, like I said, these all contain a bunch of different tools, and you can use them in many different ways to go ahead and test your systems. You can even use them for your home system. What I will say, and I'm going to go ahead and preface this, do not use them on any system or network that you do not have explicit permission to do this on, okay? And I say that because it is actually illegal. There are laws in place, such as the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and other ones that are actually prevent you from that could actually go ahead and get you into legal trouble. Okay, so all right, let's go ahead and move on. So security principles. Well, there is actually some really interesting security principles. And what we have to kind of look into the idea of, like, what are the goals of security? Well, the goals of security are based off of, and I have it a little bit here, but I'm going to expand it a little bit more. So I'm going to put these down here. There's three different, this is called the security triad, okay? And some of y'all may have seen this before in some of your other classes, but the security triad is what we basically use to qualify and justify our data. And this is how we go ahead and build off of this. So let's go ahead and actually look at this into a little bit more detail. And I'm going to go ahead and let's get started. Okay, so the first one, I hate that this. So the first one of the security triad is going to be confident. It's going to be actually the CIA. I didn't put that there, but this is called the CIA security triad. And no, it's not CIA as in for Central Intelligence Agency. It actually has a different reference. The CIA refers to this idea of something called confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And some of y'all are thinking, well, what does that actually mean in regards to security? Well, let's go ahead and look at this a little bit more, and we can kind of dive a little bit deeper in understanding what this actually means. So I'll move this here. All right, so when we talk about confidentiality, we're really looking at how do we restrict who can or can't access something. So, for example, think about it this way: should someone from HR be able to access someone's let's say paycheck or W-2? Is that something that they necessarily have to have access to? Okay. Or someone in payroll is trying to access the taxes and they don't have access. Okay. So should they have access? Is that a thing? So we want to make sure we actually restrict who shouldn't have it, and also make sure that those that should have it have access to it. The next thing we want to look at is integrity. And when we talk about integrity, and I'm a huge fan of South Park, and I think that whole Stan's dad always talks about that. But we really want to talk about managing the changes and what people can do to the data. Okay, so we're looking at like managing changes, and how do we go ahead and manage changes? Well, we make sure that let's say, for example, if I'm in charge of payroll, maybe HR needs to go ahead and be able to access it, to read it, but they can't alter anything. Okay. Or if I'm trying to go ahead and look into my let's say I'm a worker and I'm trying to get access into, another coworker's file. Should I have access at all? And if I'm the manager, maybe I do need to have access to be able to write stuff to it. So maybe I can go ahead and do that. Like, let's say I have to issue a disciplinary action. Okay. So these are some of the things we have to go ahead and kind of keep in mind when we're really deciding on how to do this. The last one's availability. This is kind of very simple. Is everything available? And what this means is that, hopefully the server isn't down. Hopefully there's, a backup in case like there's load balancing and stuff like that. So we want to make sure that the data is available. Now within these three, there are two other ones that get brought in part of the security triad, and all they really do is they really strengthen integrity, and that's the whole purpose of that. But you're going to hear this too. The next two is going to be authenticity, and then the last one's going to go ahead and be something called non-repudiation. So when we talk about this, we talk about authenticity. So we want to go ahead and make sure, like,
when we say authenticity, if you have, let's say, for example, like, a baseball card, you get it graded, you want to see how authentic it is, which means how legitimately real this is. So authenticity refers to the authenticness of, or the genuineness of like the changes. Or let's say, for example, you're sending out a document. How genuine is this? So is it authentic to you, or is it authentic to the person that actually is receiving it? Non-repudiation has to do with the fact, when we talk about something, remove non, and what does repudiation sound like? It sounds like, oh, it's it's reputable. So if something's reputable, that means that you stand by it, and that it actually, you actually can go ahead and say, yes, I speak, this is actually true. Non-repudiation refers to that, not that this is true, but more along lines of, this prevents someone from disputing the truth, or the falsivity of it. So if something's become falsified or falsified, okay? So here's an example. In the court of law, emails are typically not allowed as submissible evidence in regards to court, to a lot of court cases. Now, why is that? Well, it relies on this non-repudiation. How is it possible that I can go ahead and prove that you sent me the email? And you're going to argue and say, well, it says it came from you. Okay, but all I had to say is, well, I didn't write that email. So we got that concept of non-repudiation. Like, this is proving that this is actually genuinely made, and this is actually that you wrote this. So think of this like as your signature. You're like, that's my signature. They can compare the signature, like, that's my signature. So this is your signature on this, saying that, yes, I did this. This is actually what I did, and this is me. So this is how these two strengthen integrity a lot. But that's how we use those in the security triad concept. So then we go into the principles, okay? So the security principles and how we can go ahead and create a policy on these principles, okay? So the one thing we want to make sure is that you have to document what is allowed and what isn't allowed. So if there's no security policy, then you need to go ahead and actually sit down with the customer and be like, hey, what is it that you want that your users should not be able to do? And what should they be able to do? Okay. And then the next question you ask, or let's say you're reviewing a policy, does it specifically call out what they can and can't do? Number one. Does it also specifically call out what are the rules that has to be followed? So this is very common in what's called an acceptable use policy, okay? Now, there is a difference between, like, you're going to find out in policy making, there is actually different types. There's the policy, and then there's also the reprimand that happens after the policy has been violated, okay? So this is actually going to be, what happens when that is not followed, what is going to be there. Another thing you can look at is this is also referred to, sometimes you can see there's another type of this called the incident response plan or an IR plan. So in this case, what happens, what is the framework, and what is the actions that you have to take once a breach or a compromise has been discovered, okay? So this should actually exist. If you don't have one and your company, then that's a problem, because should you actually discover there's a compromise, which more than likely you will discover one. It may be about 30 to 60 days later, but you will discover one. And you need to figure out how you're going to mitigate this and make sure that that doesn't happen again. And then you need to make sure that these policies are what they call living policies. These policies need to be evolving and changing. If something comes up that you didn't actually take into account and all of a sudden you need to go ahead and add the policy, you need to be able to go ahead and do that. And then how do you go ahead and make sure you distribute that new update to everybody else? Those are really important when we talk about this. So when we talk about how we can secure, how do we go ahead and secure accounts? Well, the first thing we need to think of is physical security, okay? So we talk about physical security for a second. So one of my graduate classes, I was the main project we were going to do for that whole semester was we were going to be given a company. We signed a non-disclosure agreement and saying, hey, your job is to go pen test this company, and then you provide the actual results to them at the very end with your recommendations. So we got our company, we went and talked to them, we asked them, we followed the actual NIST rules that we set up. This is what we agreed upon, what we don't, this is what we can touch, what we can't touch, this and that. We basically established the rules of engagement, okay? And while we were there on our first meeting, we noticed they had AT&T as their actual backbone fiber line, okay? So they use AT&T. Well, one of my actual classmates owned an AT&T, like his uncle worked for AT&T. So, and it wasn't that he worked for AT&T like, oh yeah, I'm a technician. No, he worked at the AT&T cell phone store. So he had a lot of those AT&T polos. So one of the things we did, we tested the physical security of this actual system. And what we did is basically, we went into we walked into the foyer and we looked at the secretary that was standing there and she's like, can we help you? And we said, yes, we have a service call for AT&T and we want to make sure that everything's working with your actual line. Can you please direct us to the server room? And I kid you not, I know you think this is fake, this is not possible, kid you not. The lady goes, oh, okay, let me go ahead and show you. And she walks us to the actual security closet where the actual server room is. And there's no lock on the door, no, nothing. It even says server room on it. And she just lets us in. So we stay there for about 5-10 minutes. We go ahead and plug in a USB, which then actually go ahead and start to creating deploying a keylogger. And the keyloggers just starts logging information. Then we go back and we go ahead and collect it. We just let it sit there for about 15-20 minutes and stuff like that. Physical security, literally one of the most things you need to do. So you need to look at things such as making sure that the access points are covered. If you have a server room, no one should have access to it that doesn't need access to it. The secretary doesn't do anything with the server room. So how is she able to access the door? Because there's no lock on it. Okay. Physical access to the networks. Again, same thing. If I don't have a server room, then that's that. One of the things that you'll see a lot of times in data centers is something called a man trap. And that's the whole point of the man trap. The man trap is to trap you between making sure and verifying that you should have access to this actual area. So if you don't, you're stuck there, you can't touch anything. Prevent unauthorized people from viewing your systems. This means no shoulder surfing. How do you prevent shoulder surfing? You get those little screens that go ahead and blur things out unless you're looking straight at it. And or you go ahead and make it to where you don't actually put your computer screen where people can shoulder surf. A lot of times I think you have these open floor concepts or anything else, and I know that the purpose of them, but they're really bad for security. All you have to do is go ahead and just hover around everything else and distract somebody, and then there you go, you can go and get some information. You want to make sure you password protect your BIOS, and you learn this in the Security Plus. There's actually a couple of ways you can do that. You can do that with the key method. You can go ahead and do that with the password method. Protect systems from theft and hardware errors. So yeah, your server should be in a locked cabinet. There are locked cabinets, you can lock your server. When we walked into that server room, we had access, there was no lock, they had it in a server rack, okay? But all we had to do is open up the actual, the actual cage. And the worst part is that they were using a NAS system, which is network, it's for network access and storage, right? So they're using a network storage system. And one of the worst parts is that all we had to do is go ahead and pull out the hard drives. Because in those kind of systems, you can just pull them out and then hot swap them, okay? So we could just actually just walked out with the whole hard drive, and they probably wouldn't even know what to do. They wouldn't even probably know it's missing. Physical security. The last thing is actually going to be talking about educating users. Now, some of y'all may be taking network class or are in right now or have taken networking class for like the CCNA and IC&D classes. And what I will say is that they talk about something called the OSI model. And that one talks about having 7 layers within the OSI model, right? But technically, there's a layer beyond the 7th layer. And I will have people that will fight me on this. I will have the people that argue that there's no such thing as that. But yes, there is an 8th layer, and the 8th layer is the user, okay? So in the OSI model, the user, remember, things have to be very easy and intuitive to understand, okay? So in security, there also is another layer of this, which is the user. So you have to make sure you educate users, making sure they understand what a strong password is. A strong password doesn't just mean I'm going to add a letter, a capital letter, and a number at the end of it. That's not what that means. Warn about installing unapproved software. First of all, you should never warn about installing unapproved software. Your users should not have access to install software to begin with. That is just it. I don't care what anybody says. As a security person, you should not be allowing unauthorized users to install software that you have not vetted in your system. This is how malware gets downloaded. This is how breaches happen. They send something, they spam fish them, they spam them, doesn't matter. And they go ahead and get this amazing PDF or anything that says, here's how you can save money, da, 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 da. All it takes is that they have to open it, okay? We don't want to go ahead and have them the opportunity to install software. Everything that gets installed, they should be going through us. Yes, it's gonna be a pain in the butt, but if we wanna make sure that we don't jeopardize and maintain the integrity of our actual network, we have to do this. You should encourage reporting of suspicious activity. If your computer, you should go ahead and actually let your encourage your employees to report this. Make sure they're aware that this actually is important, and even set up like a reward system in some cases when they've reported, hey, you know, I got a fishy email. Send that to them, reward them for that. Ask users to be careful about accessing systems when logged into unsecure locations, okay? This is why they say you should not go ahead and log into your work email at Starbucks or at the hotel. You should have what's called a virtual private network, which is VPN, because then what ends up happening is you actually can go ahead and then do encryption on the network traffic. So if anybody's sniffing that traffic because it's public domain network traffic, they won't be able to get your content because it can be encrypted, okay? You should be really, really careful about that. VPNs are your friend when it comes to making sure you're accessing your stuff internally into the network. Do not share their accounts or passwords. This is a very huge thing. Do not go ahead and call, you know, your coworker and say, can you log in for me because I'm gonna be running late. No. Call your supervisor, tell them you're running late. That's all you gotta do, okay? This also goes into physical security. One of the branches of cybersecurity or information security or information assurance is called social engineering, okay? Can you engineer someone socially to do what you want them to do, okay? And I do this because, I say this because the fact this is very, very important. During my actual graduate study, when we're doing this pen testing, right? We're doing this against a company. I observed they were using a Cisco VoIP system. So I went ahead and I went to the school and I asked them, hey, can you go ahead and give me a Cisco VoIP telephone? So they gave me a VoIP phone. I took it to the actual facility. All I did is I plugged it into their actual network. It automatically assigned me an IP address. And then the next thing I was going to do was go ahead and just start calling people and see, hey, you know, this is so-and-so. I need you to go ahead and do this for me. And see what they could do. Or what they would do for me. You know, that kind of thing. I would also go ahead, we also had like what kind of things they asked to reset people's passwords. And so I would actually have those questions and ask people, hi, I would say, hi, this is James from, you know, from IT and everything. I'm actually a contractor, a temp agency, starting new. I just want to go ahead and see. We want to make sure that your actual questions are up to date and everything, and make sure you have the correct answers. And you would be surprised how people actually give you the answers. So then all I had to do is then call technical support and say, I need to reset my password. And they ask me those questions. And there you go, the password's reset. And they don't know about it until they log out and try to log back in again. Okay. Sometimes everything they don't know because they automatically get kicked out of their session. And now I'm in their session. Another thing about educating users, as well as physical security, is make sure that you also know about like not clicking links on emails, and also making sure that you understand like what is going to be expected of you. They were doing a new person orientation, and they basically went ahead and we had one of our actual classmates just get into the new person orientation, and basically just was able during their lunch, during one of their breaks, was able to get the password off of one of the laptops that was in the orientation room that had no password. So we got the Wi-Fi password automatically from the actual machine that was already logged in. So we got to make sure these are important key points we're teaching them. And when it comes to clicking on emails, this is something that you need to be doing on either a quarterly basis. It needs to be random too. You can't do it like, oh, it's going to be happen every time in the middle on the 15th of this month right here. No, make it random. Send an email that looks legitimate, and then have a link in there, and then see how many people click on that link, and document who does. Because if they click on that link, that means that they are a risk to your company. And this is what's done. I've seen this done on numerous occasions. Very successful. Okay. So, some things you look out for. Looking at the account name, making sure it should be something not easy to guess. It should never be like first initial, middle initial, last name. You should be able to go ahead and kind of give an idea of like how to work it. But you shouldn't have to go ahead and be able, oh, I already know it's always going to be first initial, middle initial, last name. Okay, cool. Doesn't matter. Okay. Or like, oh, it's the first 5 characters of the last name. Doesn't matter. You should never have a user with no password. That's just it. If there's no password, that means that they can get in blindly. That should never happen. A user should be prevented from changing a password. Which account should have this restriction? Certain accounts don't need to be changed their password. Certain accounts do. Okay, you should know which ones need to and which ones don't. So some of the other things they mentioned, like application accounting, this is actually what's referred to as baselining. You should know exactly what is being run on your machines as a baseline when it comes to services, and also when it comes to your actual processes. You should also be able to know how to read the commands that are being entered and what flags are being flagged. For example, if I was on a machine on my server, okay, and if I saw netcat tac L 7777 or 8080, what this means is netcat is what is referred to as a tunneling protocol or a tunneling application you can use to actually set up what's called a listener or forwarder. And whenever it receives, and it's going to usually be a 1%001, whenever it receives a connection on the loopback coming to this port 8080, it establishes a connection automatically. I'm not running a web server, which is what 8080 would be usually used for, and I have no applications running 8080. So why is netcat running with this and listening on this port on this IP address? It should not be doing that. So maybe I have an application that's doing that, and I need to look into that and see why it's doing that. Or maybe I don't, and someone's already on the system. Those are important key points. Process accounting, again, you should know exactly what's actually being run, how it's being run, who's running what, okay? And we talked about in the last module, super user, right? The super user, I'm going to be honest and frank, no one should have access to super user. No one should have access to root. Now, some of y'all are like, well, how do we go ahead and run commands as root if we don't have access to it? Again, we talked about that, the sudo commands. The sudo user, you should disable root altogether. Disable root altogether, okay? Everyone should have sudo capabilities that needs it, And the reason why you want that is, let's say you have an employee that's actually go ahead and on leave. Let's say they're on maternity leave, okay? But however, Cheyenne's account is logging in and doing things that they shouldn't be doing because Cheyenne hasn't been at work for the last 6 months. That's how you know. If everybody logs into the user root to do stuff, how do you know who's doing what? You can't go ahead and do that kind of accounting for who's doing what. This is why it's important to do that. So when we talk about security tools, talk about Kali. There's some really good capabilities in there, social engineering, password attacks. And you know what we're going to talk about in this next one. So in the next module, you're going to learn how to use what's called a password cracking tool. It's going to be command line based, and it's called John the Ripper. Okay, not Jack the Ripper, John the Ripper. The GUI-fied version is called Johnny. Okay, so we're going to use John to go ahead and crack some passwords, and you're going to see how these different types of password cracking tools work. And that's what we're going to do, and that's going to be the activity we're working on for this actual module. Other than that, guys, everyone, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, please go ahead and hit me up with an email. I'd love to go ahead and chat with you. If you have any questions, please post them. You'll go ahead and actually get everything taken care of. If not, you can go ahead and move on to the next video on how to use Johnny or John the Ripper. And then from there, everything else, there will be another one, probably another video or two that you can go ahead and look at that. And then you'll go ahead and be done with this module. If not, see you next video.